Right from the start, I would like to correct an false impression that I am the founder, pioneer of the Vihara Mandal missions. I am not. The one who is the founder, who was the founder, was Father Francisco Subeldia. He was the one that took full responsibility for the mission right from the start, that did most of the work, the heavy pioneering work of going around the villages, of instructing the villages right from the start, both in Vihara Mandal and in Unai. So he is the man who for the first 7 years, from 1961 to 1967, saw to it that a new church in South Gujarat, that is to say from Mandal to Unai, was put firmly on its feet. The history of the Vihara Mandal missions can roughly be divided into 5 parts, corresponding to the 5 decades, beginning in 1961. So from 1961 to 1970, we have the first, if you want, honeymoon years, the best years, according to my impression, of the history of the mission. The first 10 years were, I consider, the best, simply because they are the years in which we were and lived and worked closely with the people. We lived in the villages. When we went there, we would be there for 3-4 days a week at a time and stayed with the villagers and became part of them. So we were very close to them, and we were without anything. We went with empty hands, with nothing. And so they felt easily at home with us. We could relate to them. And they are the years that the people who have survived now, 50 years of the mission, remember best and most. The first years were, as I said, the founding years, and Subeldia was there right from the start. I was there with him right from the start. But I had to go for tertianship after 6 months. After I returned from tertianship, he put me in charge of the Mandal area, and he himself kept charge of both Vihara and Unai. So these are the years where we could give people the best of what we had, and that was the faith. We had nothing to give them, no American supplies, no money, no nothing. So, yes, we could give them only of ourselves, our faith, and our lives shared with them. So these were the first 4, 5, 6 years in which we had no vehicles, no motorcycles, no jeeps. But then after that, everything changed. In 1966-67, there was a famine in the whole of South Gujarat, and people were affected. Fortunately, there was a lot of supplies from CRS USAID that were coming into the country. And we were able to relieve hundreds of villages and to feed them during these years of crisis, both in the Jankwao area, Jankwao Dedipada area, and Vihara Unai area. But that is also what changed the whole character of the mission, when we no longer went either walking, cycling, or in bullock carts, or borrowed jeeps. The people remember the years that we were close to them. After 1966, we gradually began to have all the facilities we needed to go and visit all the villages and come back at night. So we had first motorcycles, then jeeps, and that is what helped us to contact more villages than we could have done simply by walking on bullock cart or even cycles. So during the first years when I came after 1962, I started hiring a cycle in Viara and then go and visit the villages for 2 or 3 days, staying in the villages with the people. The famine years were the years in which we received mountainous supply of grain, mostly from USAID, CRS USAID. This we distributed freely among the people, among hundreds of villages, most of which we didn't even know. But the consequences that we became known to the people in a space of 1 or 2 years, which would have taken us years, decades, to reach the people. We expanded mostly our development work, not the work of catechizing people and forming the Christian community in the south. That happened almost by itself. The people came to us, and they were Protestants in the area of the Brethren Mission. Okay, in fact, that is where we started in Chankri with the Adivasis there who already had heard about Christianity. Many of their leaders had been in the hostel in Viara, and they were now community leaders because they were the only people who knew how to read and write. So the famine years made us known both here and in the northern part of the mission, that is Jankwa Dediapada. The famine years made us known among the people. And so we didn't have to go to find a way into the villages. After 1967, we began social on a big scale. 1967 right up till 1971, 72. We had a project from CRS USAID, and that project continued almost till 1971. So those were the real beautiful, if you want, pioneering years. After that, the 1970s were years of consolidation. Young Jesuits were coming to join us. Even the secular clergy began to appear from the seminaries. They were not there right at the start. So the second decade was a decade of consolidating the work that had already begun in the villages. So small communities were already there in Chankri, in Vatpada, in Jichbordi, Mirpur. We even began right from the start with educating the Adivasis and opening hostels for them. High schools would come later, after 1975. So during that decade, the second decade, we consolidated our social work, rationalized it, if you want. And then Father Corral began his life work of starting a milk cooperative society. That was one of the key ministries, if you want, key apostolates, to get the people to come together to work for their own progress and development. And it has happened, because soon after Father Corral started his milk society, under great difficulties. The start wasn't easy, just as the start of the mission wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling, because you saw that the people were benefiting. In around 1975, the first school in South Gujarat was opened by the Vedrunas in Ava. They were real pioneers because no priest could reach them for Mass every day, and they had to live among people who they didn't know. There was Elvira, who's in Spain now, Sister Philomena, Mary Kuti. These were the pioneers in Ava. Father Corral helped social work very much, both with the Milk Society, which gave the people now a new source of income. More than that, it kept the people in the villages right through the year. Before, after Christmas or so, people would migrate to Surat, to Navsari, to the farms of people in Bardoli, Palsana, all that area. And then they would come back just in time to start their agricultural operations in their own fields. But now, after the milk societies were founded, they had no need to go out, and they had a constant source of income. Every month they got whatever milk they produced, they were able to have cash in hand. Together with that, we had started saving schemes for the people. And so we had no need to dole out either supplies or money. I think that is one of the key policies that we followed here, is not to make of the Adivasis, sort of make them dependent on us, make them beggars to come looking only for their daily sustenance, or even for work to start to keep their milk societies going. No, that was one of the key apostolates that we started, beginning with Father Corral. Later, the government, the local bodies would take up the government in Gandhinagar, yes. They took up the scheme, and the milk cooperative society spread throughout the whole of South Gujarat. I don't think even today that they are working ideally, because no one has any scruples among the secretaries and the presidents of the society to take as much as they wanted. And the people too didn't challenge them as to what they were doing, the secretaries and the presidents of the milk societies. That happened everywhere in the Vyaramandal area, and continues to happen in the milk societies all over South Gujarat. So the second year was a year of consolidating the mission. And in the 80s it was that the schools all over South Gujarat began. I think we have done a great job by opening first hostels, where both for boys and for girls right from the beginning. Yes, and then later on we started the schools. So 1980 to 1990, most of the schools in South Gujarat were founded. After that, we had the 90s, in which the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and Bhajan had their influence grow in the whole of South Gujarat. So we were then, particularly to the end of the 90s, fighting the Bajrang Dal and the Vishwa Hindu Parishad in the villages. In the villages, the Adivasis themselves hadn't joined the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, but the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and the Bajrang Dal, they themselves, they brought in people from outside to do the damage that they did in South Gujarat. The schools, so the first apostolate that we think really had a big impact on the villages in South Gujarat and on the economy, were the milk societies. After that, it was the schools. So the 1980s belonged to the schools in South Gujarat. During the 1990s, we were still able, CRS by that time, by the 1990s, had cut down a lot of the supplies of grains, and mostly for the boardings. It was needed for the boardings, not so much for development work in the villages. So we reached out to other agencies that were willing to help, like Manas Unidas, Miserior in Germany, CARE, I think it is the Protestant NGO, that did a lot of work in South Gujarat. In fact, right at the start, the first 10 years, we had, if you want, no competition for the allegiance of the Adivasis to us. Gandhi himself had entrusted his whole work to a pioneer among the Adivasis, that was a man called Thakur. Okay, he took up Gandhi's the work among the Adivasis, and they had the Veche ashram. But there were no other NGOs at the time, and no one to compete with us for the loyalty of the Adivasis. So it was in the 1990s when the people were with us, but they didn't fight as they should have, or we think they should have, fight the Bajrang Dal and the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. So that is what prompted us to review or re-evaluate all our work in South Gujarat. That was done between 2002 to 2004. The whole of South Gujarat was involved in an evaluation and policy making meetings that we had all over South Gujarat. And by 2004, we had already the evaluation in place and the policy document, which changed our whole relationship to the people, or should have changed our whole relationship to the people. Besides the work that we were doing using similar policies in South Gujarat, you started with in a town, and then you built boarding for boys, for girls, and then we had development work, which is largely land leveling, making paddy fields, getting the people to make up their paddy fields, and yes, and a lot of food for work like roll buildings and even digging wells. Our first project was to dig 57 wells all over South Gujarat after the famine, and then supply them with pump sets to use the water for irrigation. Now, of course, that has all gone away because people have bore wells of their own. Today in Mandal itself, they must be having over 100 bore wells, which the people use mostly for agriculture. The year 2000, we were already making the evaluation of the missions of South Gujarat, in which we clearly defined what we wanted to do, the kinds of apostolates that we would undertake. And that involved getting the laity to take responsibility. Parish councils, for example, had already begun, even in the late 70s, parish councils. But they were more or less rubber stamps that did what the parish priest or the fathers wanted and said, and took resolutions that satisfied everybody. So that evaluation, in a way, it has fizzled out because the great ideals we had proposed to the missionaries in that evaluation were difficult to implement. You would have to have lay participation, lay people taking charge of their own development. So to a certain extent, we did that. What helped the Viara Mandal mission was BSc. They came and right through a whole year, they came and trained people to take leadership, and take responsibility for their own lives. The fruit of that we see now in, for example, the Mahila Mandal in Mandal. There it's entirely run by the women under Francis's inspiration and guidance and support. But the Mahila Mandals have been a huge success in Viara Mandal missions. And in bringing women to the fore, in Adivasi society, at least from our experience, it is the women who do all the work in the house, also in the fields, And once they take responsibility, then your mission is firmly founded on rock. How did the Bhajan Sammelan start in South Gujarat? After Borobio's death in 1968, we began to have a celebration every year to remember Borobio and the work that he had done in all these villages which we now visit. There was a reason to start a Bhajan Harifais because when we came here, we had no liturgy, there were no mass books except in Gujarati. And we functioned in the first years in Gujarati. As soon as I came and started visiting the villages, I immediately realized that without knowing the language, neither the people nor we would be happy, communicating with them. And so I wanted to start learning Gamit, which I did. But it got a big boost when Joe Lobo came. He left the college and came down to South Gujarat. He went to Unai, and from there he came to Viara, found the mission here much more available to what he was thinking of. When I came here to Viara and the Mandal mission, we had no liturgy except the Gujarati liturgy for the people, no bhajans for the people to sing during Mass and so on. The Adivasis' experience of music and so on was limited to the music they themselves produced in the villages for weddings, for different occasions. And that was, they didn't even know about music, say the music that Gurjarvani and the others produced in Ahmedabad. They didn't know about them. In fact, they couldn't sing anything else except Adivasi songs. They couldn't sing filmi geet. So then I entered into this area and started composing hymns in Gamit. Okay, there is already a CD of all those compositions, which was made some 4 or 5 years ago. So I started on my own, trying to fuse Western music together with the music of the Adivasis. Then it occurred to me to start every year a Bhajan Sammelan in order to, first of all, to keep remembering Borobio and all the wonderful work that he had done, and also to increase our supply of hymns. Now these hymns were not only devotional hymns. These hymns were small stories from the Bible, okay, and they would read the Bible. We had, by that time, a small little booklet in Gamit. Then when Joe Lobo came, this policy of, first of all, using the language, knowing it, and living in the villages as long as it took for you to learn the language. Because here everything is done in Gamit. We also use Gujarati and, if needed, English. But the whole church, when they have their leaders meeting and so on, it's all in Gamit. All of them know Gujarati well too. People didn't know Gujarati except the elders who would go to Viara. They picked up Gujarati in the village, in the towns. So then I decided to start a Harifai, Bhajan, what we call it at the beginning, Harifai, Bhajan Harifai. Today we call it Bhajan Sammelan. What we got from the Bhajan Sammelan were at least 40, 50 hymns, new hymns coming into the church in South Gujarat. And more importantly, they're coming to know Jesus through those hymns that they composed, and that they are now sung in every village in every Catholic village, villages where there are Catholics. Those hymns continue to be sung. So after the first Bhajan Harifai, the people took to compose it. They said, this is what we have to do, okay, to put the faith into and the knowledge and love of Christ into hymns. And they did that fantastically. Right through from 1969 till today, we have had these Bhajan Sammelans, and we have had a surplus now of Adivasi music, and bhajans and so on, that were not exactly devotional bhajans, but they brought to you the life of Christ and the stories of Christ, of the Gospels brought to the people. So that is the best way to propagate, through music, through bhajan mandalis and so on. So that is, since 1969, we've held bhajan sammelans here in Viara Mandal definitely, but also in Unai and Jangwao. So when Joe Lobo came, he brought in this whole aspect of dealing with the people only in Gamit, which he did. In fact, he took a sort of a vow that he would not speak in any other language except Gamit to the Gamits. So with the Gamit, he always spoke only in Gamit. In fact, when we had a big anniversary memorial for Father Barobio in Viara, Joe Lobo addressed the whole crowd. There must have been about 500 people that day. He addressed the whole crowd in Gamit. There on the stage, there were fathers, sisters, they were big shots in the government here, local. So they all came, and they must have been surprised to hear Joe Lobo speak in 1969, address a whole crowd of Gamits in Gamit. So the Bhajan Sammelan also serves a catechetical purpose, okay, to get the people to know and to rejoice over incidents, miracles, teachings of Jesus through hymns. So we had a similar approach in most of the missions, that is to say, we started living in a center, say Viara, okay, Viara and Unai itself. So we started living in a center, and then from there going out to people in the villages, Mass every week or every 2 weeks or once a month. Then the center itself doing a lot of development work, then hostels for boys and girls. So this was the general policy of South Gujarat missions. In Viara, we changed from speaking with the people and preaching to them in Gujarati to using only Gamit. It's not that we sat down and wrote out all our philosophy, but that we shared during meal times, during times when that we are free. And we shared with Janko also. We used to have missionary meetings, regular missionary meetings every month, in which we just shared our experiences and what we were doing. We had to work out a whole new policy for the mission. And what we decided was, first of all, to function only in the language, which is Gamit, and to promote that. Then we decided that people take over responsibility. So what you call now lay participation, we already began in the 1960s, especially after the Vatican Council. So our own Viara mission at the time, although Mandal is included, Mandal has only developed now after the Jagrati High School was founded. So then later in the 70s, there were people who wanted to break off the mold that we had been put in and try and serve the real needs of the people. So we had Thomas Thanipara, who started what he called living in poverty so that he could reach the people and not go to the villages and preach on a full stomach. And the people then, at that time, were still suffered hunger at that time. They were very poor, very poor. They were exploited. They took to drink easily. So when we first came into the villages after 6, 7 in the evening, you could see a lot of drunkards, which you don't see now. People still drink, perhaps not as much as they drank during those early years. They are a little more ashamed now of being found drunk and just lying on the roadside. So they don't do that any longer. Thomas Thanipara started his work, okay, and he wanted to live in poverty, go take a cycle and go at the most to the villages and not a motorcycle or jeeps. So he started living that sort of life and developing the people, getting the people to develop themselves. Another one was different from the rest of the missions was Joe Idikunel, who died in 2001. Okay? So Joe Idikunel started what we might call the rights mode, getting people to fight for their rights, fighting people who are exploiting the Adivasis. So this is what Joe Idikunel did in Rajpipla. And he was well known in the Rajpipla area and what is called now Narmada district. All that area he was well known, not only by the ordinary people in the villages, but by government officials, politicians. Okay? He was well known and to an extent feared because he would let nothing stop him to work against the exploitation of the Adivasis in the whole of South Gujarat. Unfortunately, he died in 2000 or 2001. Then there was another experiment in South Gujarat, which was the experiment of the Tanakla sisters. They went and started living in Tanakla and going around to all the villages, trying to get the people to do for themselves or what elsewhere was being done for them in South Gujarat. So they went out, they lived among the people, they formed Mahila Mandals, okay, to get the people now to think for themselves, to develop their own strategy to get out of poverty. 2002, 2004, I was back to Jivan Darshan, where I had already stayed for 10 years with Devasya, who is here. There was a meeting of South Gujarat younger priests in Jivan Darshan, where I was in Baroda. And they asked me to give them what I thought, how the mission policy, how the missions should be run, etc. Then I gave them what the lessons I learnt from my own experience in working in South Gujarat. And these are some of the points that I made. First, the spirit of the pastoral Jesuit community is more important than actual work done in a negative spirit. Fathers, sisters, catechists, and leaders, how they relate among themselves with mutual love, respect, acceptance, forgiveness, encouragement, animation. Each center would become a model of the church, how we wanted the church to function. The second lesson that I had given those young priests was there is no substitute for personal integrity, transparency, and goodness. If you come to South Gujarat as a missionary, then you have to have these qualities of personal integrity. You can fool some of the people some of the time, especially if they gain from your foolishness, but not all the people all the time. You must practice what you preach, or else set up some other kind of shop elsewhere. We are in the business of getting people to practice what we preach, which is Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. After having worked in South Gujarat all these 50 years, okay, you ask a question like, what did the Adivasis get from your presence in South Gujarat? Are they better human beings for being with us? Or are they like the rest of the population? So we had to ask these difficult questions. And I finally sort of summarized what we have achieved in the last 50 years. For the last 50 years, we may or may not have gained eternal salvation for the Adivasis, but we have attained lesser salvations. Through personal contact with people in the villages, we brought them a sense of dignity, of self-respect that they were constantly being denied in the mainstream society. Whenever they went to Viara, for example, or to Surat, okay? The moment you call yourself an Adivasis, you were some sort of inferior being. Our living and working with them helped us to give them dignity and self-respect. Through the length and breadth of Adivasi South Gujarat, we have relieved thousands from poverty and hunger and provided them a measure of material comfort, food security through development programs. That is what the mission here and in the Bharuch district also have achieved. Within our limits, we raised the standard of education for the Adivasis with our primary and high schools and brought quality education where absolutely none existed for the Adivasis. So all our high schools in South Gujarat today, about 14 of them, are making them leaders and getting them to think and act for themselves. 3 interventions that helped people economically and built them up as a community were milk societies, water harvesting, Mahila Mandals, and self-help groups. These are the things I think that most contributed to building up a church. That is to say, people who will care for one another in society. Dispensaries of the sisters brought medical relief to the doorstep of poor Adivasis and in times of emergency. The whole atmosphere in South Gujarat has changed. First of all, material progress and the help that the government is giving them. They don't get all the help that the government has set aside for them. But the Adivasis in the last 50 years have come a long way forward. This, I think, is due also to the work of all the missions, especially now the work of education. They are being given as good an education as they would, for example, in a city school of Baroda, Bharuch or Ahmedabad. So they are getting that sort of quality education in the villages.